I would say Black girls in society, there are a lot of stereotypes. I remember as a very young kid, I determined like, well, that's what people expect. I'm not going to fall for what people expect. I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, and educated in Long Island. I'm of Nigerian descent. We're pretty loud, so being a Nigerian New Yorker, it's kind of a double-edged sword, I would say. Music has always been a huge part of my life. I had a teacher, Mr. Harris. He taught us about old school African-American jazz. He taught me how to play the piano, not well, but he taught me about it. And he was the one that kind of taught me how to draw. Mr. Harris really was a key part in terms of the creative side. Growing up in Far Rockaway, we lived in lower income housing. It's a neighborhood that's kind of associated with all the stereotypes you imagine with lower income housing. Because of that, and because I saw it firsthand, I think I was in 4th grade, in that moment I was like, I'm never going to fall for that, teenage pregnancy, drugs, and all this other, I'm never doing that. My dad went to college in Nigeria. When you do come from another country, usually your education is kind of like null and void. So he had to work his way back up into getting a degree that was recognized. My parents worked their way up and then they bought a house in the suburbs. And so when we got the house, I'm like, whoa, this is real, this isn't a movie. Around that same time, I also realized that I didn't feel safe in the suburbs. And I didn't understand why I didn't feel safe in a neighborhood that's statistically safer than where I came from. And I was trying to really unpack why. This was when a few people back in my old neighborhood were incarcerated. So I got really interested in prisons because of that. And I started looking at the architecture of them. And when I looked at the windows on the prisons and I looked at the windows in my lower income housing, they had bars on the windows. I realized that why I didn't feel safe in my home is that there were no bars in my home in the suburbs. And right at that point, I recognized if there is a similarity between prison architecture and lower income housing architecture, does it actually have an impact on your psyche? Like if it feels like you're going home when you go to prison, then of course you're gonna keep going back to prison. At that point, I decided that I wanted to be an architect because I wanted to really redesign lower income housing. I went into architecture school, and to be a good architect, you have to understand physics. I took physics, and I failed woefully. So I decided to pivot, and I looked at computer science. And that's where I first heard about graphical user interfaces. And it was in that moment where I realized that the mindset is exactly the same. You're just deciding where a button should go versus where the doorway should go. I recognized that where are the top designers in this field, and San Francisco was like time and time again where it was. The way I got to Netflix when I moved to San Francisco was when a friend of mine messaged me and said, you should check out Netflix. I'm like, Netflix has a design team? For me, the biggest shock when I started at Netflix was how brilliant people are. I'm working with designers who were on the initial Apple iPhone team, and they are my coworkers. With Netflix, the biggest thing that drew me to it was the candidness and the freedom and responsibility. The autonomy is insane. And it is extremely humbling because you realize also with that what your choices can do for that 130 million people. Being a woman and being a Black woman at that, society doesn't immediately trust you. I am used to having to work and earn that. To be somewhere where I don't feel that takes a lot of pressure off of me because now I can actually just excel in what I'm good at. I think my drive has still always been people doubting me. There's always been a thing of like being expected to fail and always coming out on the other side of it. There's just an edge of when you prove people wrong, then being the other and like, you come in and people have these like preconceived notions of what you're gonna be, and just to kind of leave a room and just know that like I shattered all of that.